Congratulations in order to all you for finding this room. I kind of raced all around the hotel trying to figure it out, so thank you for finding it. I feel like I should be flagging people outside there, but with all that said, I don't know what kind of crew we have here, if you guys are into development or whatnot, but I'll just kind of go over a few things here and talk about a little bit about the gaming industry, mobile gaming, indie industry in particular, and talk about Gamesalad, what we're doing, how we're helping indies be successful in this market. So taking a step back, I think it's a pretty fascinating time in the games industry here, particularly for indies. What we've seen over the past 5 years with the advent of open platforms for publishing mobile games has just been phenomenal, boon to the indie industry. Typically, it was all about finding that publisher to get your game onto that prized shelf space at Target and whatnot. And now with digital distribution, devices in everybody's pockets, that's all changed the game there. So it's a very exciting time. I was reading some industry stat around here that mobile gaming is supposed to grow to, I think, 24 billion in the next 3 years, which is a pretty staggering statistic if you think about it. So, there's no barriers to entry to publish your game. It's a $23 billion market out there. All you need to do is make a cool game and publish it, and you're dipping into all that, right? It's good living, right? Actually, it's pretty tough. So I use this as a cheap way to insert a Sharknado joke, but indies are facing really tough odds out there. It's extremely challenging. It's almost like a tornado of sharks coming at you, and all you have is a chainsaw to defend yourself in real time. While the a lot of the friction has been removed in the indie game development process, it's still challenging. There's hundreds and hundreds of thousands of apps out there in the App Store. It's incredibly hard to cut through that noise, and indies face increasing odds because they don't have things like seven-figure marketing budgets and big development teams that can sit out and create this endless vast amount of content to keep people playing your games. So it's actually very tough to be an indie, but there are some things that you can do to leverage the strengths, like jiu-jitsu. There's things that the big guys can't do that the indies can do, and that would be my recommendation to a lot of indies, to embrace those things and use them to their advantage. So let me talk about a little bit of data here. It's actually tough living on the long tail there. So you have this big promise of multi-billion dollars, million-dollar hits coming out of the App Store, multi-billion-dollar market. So indies are rushing in there. They're publishing. They're getting onto these app stores. But when you look at the data, it's actually very scary. This was taken from a couple of years ago, but I think some of the general broad conclusions are still correct. And this was a sample of 250 iOS developers talking about what is the average or median revenue that they make in the span of 12 months off a single title. So it's pretty scary. 25th percentile is clocking in around $140 through the span of 12 months. The 50th percentile, the median, the person in that middle of that 250 group, is making around $1,100 per title. That's not what you want to quit your day job on and get fully behind those type of economics. Moving up the curve, and obviously it's heavily skewed towards that 1%, the supercells of the world that are cranking out 6 figures a day. So that really throws that tail off there. But if we look at the 75th percentile, it starts getting a little bit better, a little over 10 grand, but not something you want to quit your day job for. And then once you start to get up to that 90th percentile, it's around 50 grand. That's maybe interesting, but with that kind of grim picture for what's facing most people out there, there's ways that you can use that to your advantage and still make a good living. And I've got some interesting case studies talking about people that have done exactly that. This is another interesting finding from that same survey, is that really what you find is that the more titles you release as a developer, the more average, or rather median revenue you make per game. So obviously pretty bad, one game, you make about $500. 2 to 3 games, it gets a little bit better, around $2,500. And as you get more and more and more, we find around 10 plus games that goes up to over $15,000 median revenue per title. So it's a very interesting dynamic there. One would say that if you keep at it, keep getting better, learning more, you're going to get better and better kind of results there. But what we're finding is our community is using this to their advantage, and what they're doing is releasing a lot of games. Not hiding out for 2 years of development cycle and releasing that one magical game that will make them millions of dollars, but really kind of calibrating their expectations and knowing that, hey, going into it, the odds are that even if I'm decent, making 15 grand's a good day. So that's, again, nothing to quit your day job for, but what if you did that 10 times, 20 times? All of a sudden that starts to become more meaningful. And I think that's an interesting dynamic that the indies are starting to take advantage in the App Store. It's not just that one mega title that lasts for 5 years and just rakes in all the money. It's a lot of just little wins, a lot of singles and doubles. You keep going out there and hitting it And if you know what you're doing it right, and you're able to leverage all that kind of cross-promotion amongst those titles, you're able to start making some real money there. So, so when I talked about what are the advantages that indies have, some more data for you. A recent study came out that said that of all the global mobile game sessions out there, approximately 68% are produced by indies. That's pretty cool. So there's a real demand for this content out there. People are actually playing these games. And in fact, not only people playing these games, the vast majority of people are playing indie games out there on the global scale. So what can indies do, for little Mac reference from the Mike Tyson's Punch-Out, to take on the big guys out there? Well, again, I think there's 4 things that I'm seeing people do out there that is really kind of giving indies an advantage. One of those is speed to market. So again, I've referenced the massive team of person taking years to make that one title. Why not get out there with quick cross-platform development tools and make a title every month or month or two, and start kind of chipping away and hitting those singles and doubles. I'm seeing that as a really powerful strategy. Second point here is agility. Because if you take a year or two to launch your title out there, there's a lot of assumptions that get baked in that have not really stood the test of real consumer feedback. So the idea of getting something out there quickly, throwing it out there, listening to the players, listening to your users, looking at those metrics, and being able to iterate quickly and get another version out there, or get a new game that's kind of built on the lessons you learned from that prior game, is really kind of a huge advantage for indies. So they're quicker, they're more agile, they're able to react and market quicker. And then obviously cost structure is a huge benefit. In some ways it can be seen as a disadvantage, but in kind of looking at how the big companies go about developing these games, they've got these big green light meetings, and there's 20 people looking at your pitch deck, and they may like it, may give you the go ahead to get some more resources and develop it further, and then you come back a year later and you've got your perfect game, and they test market it in Australia, and the numbers are bad, so they kill your game, and it's just insane stuff. So the ability to just kind of get rid of all that noise, get something out there, and really test it, see what's going on, learn from that, iterate, and kind of keep going in the market is a strategy that we've seen be very successful. And this last point, risk-taking, and this is obviously one of the great boons of being an indie developer is that you don't have to worry about your quarterly earnings and your stock price when that game goes out. You can throw something out there, see if it works, and if it doesn't work, no harm, no loss. Learn from it. That's the most important thing. Iterate, get something back out there, and just keep iterating and keep getting stuff out there. And that's why you're seeing a lot of the interesting stuff all come from the indie community out there. It's pretty funny when, I won't mention names, but a lot of the big companies are out there and they're just kind of picking and choosing the indie games that are all popping, and they're like, okay, that's our market test. Now let's go make this 10 times better and bigger and flashier and stuff. So I think there are some advantages to being an indie, budgetary constraints aside, that allow you to actually be more successful in these markets and capture a piece of that 68% of those play sessions out there and being successful in that market. So with that as a context, let me talk a little bit about Gamesalad. I'm going to be mindful of time here. And feel free to jump in. And this is a small audience. If you guys have any questions, just shout. So for those of you who don't know, Gamesalad is one of the leading mobile game creation platforms out there. We allow people to quickly develop games for iOS, Android, and HTML5. Our big secret sauce is that we use a visual approach to development that requires no coding. So I don't know how many developers we have here, but the first reaction I get when I tell people like this is they kind of laugh me out of the room, and there's no way you can make successful games unless you're coding. Well, Gamesalad is a testament that you don't need to code to make successful games. We've had over 70 games reach the top 100 in the US App Store. More than 10 have reached the top 20. And we've had a #1 game and a #2 game all in the US App Store, which is obviously the most competitive out there. So seeing some huge success from the community. We now have over 675,000 developers that have built over 180,000 games. And on any given month, we see roughly 20 to 30% of every game published to the iOS App Store is built off Gamesalad. So getting a lot of traction out there, a lot of kind of success stories out there. And again, it's maybe not these the 1%ers that are driving the millions of revenue, but lots of people making a decent income or living or hobby, whatever your goals are, in indie game development using Gamesalad. And having removed that barrier of code is a huge boon to so many people out there that have always wanted to create a game, or maybe had good sense for aesthetics or game design, but didn't want to spend 5 years learning Objective-C to go out there and make their iPhone game. So what exactly does this mythical software look like? I'll give you a quick little video rundown. So the architects of Gamesalad, a lot of them came from working in the game industry, and they found themselves creating the same things, same functions, same gameplay over and over and over. And so what all the big companies do is they create tools to kind of make that faster, and they kind of identify all those things that they're doing over and over. And so the idea was, well, what if we took that and created a visual interface and allowed anyone, not just these developers at the big gaming companies, to make games. And if we've kind of created this pretty vast, powerful subset of all these actions and menus and items that you can do, and essentially provide input dials and sliders and things like that to adjust the fine points of these actions, anybody can start making games. So it's been pretty incredible to see the diverse gameplay that we've seen come out of this. All types of casual games that you see in the App Store, people are recreating in Gamesalad. And then the beauty is, once you're done, not only did you not have to code any of this, but at the end of it, you go to publish, and a little dialog box comes up, and it asks you, would you like to make an iPad game, an iPhone game, an Android game for the Google Play, for the Kindle Fire, for the Nook, and you just kind of check all the things you want. We create that package up in the cloud and return it to you, and then you're good to go. You go up, upload to the App Store, and start making your millions. So very cool tool set that's kind of identifying a lot of the big barriers to entry in game development. We try to streamline a lot of that stuff to make it as easy as possible to create games. Kind of a separate note here. This is probably a separate track in itself, but is HTML5. We are early believers in HTML5. We think it holds a lot of promise there for a common standard for game development. If you asked me 2 years ago when I thought that it would be ready for prime time, I would say 2 to 3 years. Now, if you ask me today, I'm going to tell you 2 to 3 years. It's getting there. It's really not a function of, it's really a function of the hardware, the browser support, and some of the open standards. And I've seen it progress immensely during that time. But for high demanding applications like games, things that have physics, lots of motion, high FPS, HTML5 is still kind of finding its way there as a good solution there. So we kind of see it today as an interesting replacement for Flash on the desktop. It's getting there on mobile. If you design around some of the limitations on mobile, it's possible to make a decent game. But we also support native publishing to iOS and Android because there's such little tolerance for imperfections and latency in games that little latency can make all the difference in how people react to your games. So we are taking a long view on HTML5. One of the interesting things that I think is not too common to a lot of just development platforms is we're trying to figure out what is that end-to-end suite for making game development and publishing and distribution and marketing, all that kind of a complete cohesive picture there. So one of the biggest problems that we've seen in our community, the indie community, and actually all the big gaming companies in general is this concept of distribution and user acquisition. It's getting increasingly hard, as I mentioned, with hundreds of thousands of games in the App Store. And that's actually favoring those big guys, the 1%ers, because they've got 7 figures in marketing budget. They'll go out and do some CPI campaigns and acquire a bunch of users, and that's great. But what about the guy that maybe doesn't even have a 5-figure marketing budget? What's he going to do? So what we've done is, so we've got all these games out there doing millions and millions of people playing these games, and we've created our own cross-promotion network. And it's really to help indies get more visibility throughout this whole community and network that we've created. So you can see here on the side, this little recommendation bar, a little thing pops up, and it's got kind of intelligent recommendations for the games that people playing this would also like this. And what we're finding is that we're getting phenomenal conversion rates, somewhere in the order of 3 to 5% from picking up that game and playing it to actually going to the App Store and downloading it. So it is able to move traffic very effectively. And then what we're doing is further segmenting that by geography, things like that. I'll talk about a little bit of our initial international plans. So then, creating this broad distribution network on a global scale, and then going back and working with our top developers that say, hey, I've got this cool game. I don't have a massive marketing budget. I need help. So we bring various things that a publisher would bring, like marketing and PR and relationships with all the stores. But what we find is the biggest kind of decision point in going with the solution is getting access to that cross-promotion network and being able to drive millions of downloads without having to pay for a single thing. Question in the audience.
Is this optional in your game? Or is this
It's optional, right. So actually there's 2 versions. So we have a freemium version of games that allows you to publish to the iOS App Store for free. In exchange for that, we mandate that bar. So if you don't want to pay us, then we're going to get some distribution out of the relationship. If you do pay for our pro membership, then it's completely optional, opt-in, and it helps you get more traffic. So what we do is we help developers exchange traffic. So it's proportional to how much traffic you refer, you get proportional traffic referred back to you. So I know I'm a little short on time, so I'm going to kind of breeze through some of this stuff. I mentioned international. We're getting a lot of interest, particularly in Asia. And what's interesting with the visual platform is that, historically, if you wanted to develop games and you were in China, you needed to know computer science and English, because all these languages are written in English. Those are two pretty big barriers for a game developer. Well, what happens if we strip all that text out of our software and turn it into localized, simplified Chinese, and then the computer science part of the equation is removed as well. So huge barriers being removed in that scenario. We announced a partnership recently with Tencent to help us really get a foothold in the China market there. So they're helping us really kind of tailoring the software for that Chinese market. Things like Facebook and Twitter don't necessarily exist there. So we're using the QQ network, which is the predominant social network there. Using things like carrier billing through China Mobile, because less than 10% of the Chinese population has a credit card. So really trying to devise these types of solutions that are kind of tailored for local developers creating content relevant for that market. So let's talk about some games. So I kind of mentioned all these top games. I'm going to highlight a few examples that I think are really doing a good job in the indie game development in general, but also using Gamesalad to its strengths. So this first example is a developer called Board.com. He kind of started off in a casual Flash site doing kind of small kind of Flash games. Wanted to move into mobile, kind of looked at all the different solutions out there, picked up Gamesalad, and came up with this game called Escape 3D, which is kind of like this. It's not really 3D, but it's like faux 3D. But it's like this point-and-click adventure game where you're put in these environments and there's a timer and you need to get out of there. For whatever reason, this thing caught fire, kind of highlighted by this one here, unfortunately called Escape 3D The Bathroom. I have to tell people that with a straight face every time I talk about a #1 game. That hit #1, and it was second only to Facebook overall in the US App Store. So these guys caught lightning in a bottle. But what they did once they did that was started to basically do a whole series of sequels. So Escape 3D, the Jail, Escape 3D, the Pyramid, all these different ones. And they used that one marquee title to cross-promote all that. And so they cranked out, I think, 20 games in 2 months. And this is like a team of 4 or 5 guys. They had a lot of the artwork done, but essentially once you get that core gameplay, it's a lot of like art swaps and skinning. So those games, the best ones hit #1, as I mentioned, #2, #5, #16, and #22 in the US App Store. And they did that within 2 months. So that scares the crap out of these big gaming companies that spend 2 years developing their one monolithic game, and here's some small shop in here cranking out 5 top 20 hits in a couple months. Another one here is this Chilean developer that we have. He's actually a professor and a part-time magician and a part-time game developer. So he started developing these games. He came up with this game called E-Pig. It's a cute little pig. He's actually a flatulent pig, and that's how he moves around these various environments, and this was more of an international success. It had some follow in the United States, but it was #1, I think, in 8 countries for a long time, and it was in a top 100 game in 35 countries. And then the same thing, he had that one big hit, and then he just started iterating on it and doing 10 different versions of E-Pig. Cranked it all out over the span of a year, and had just countless #1 games, countless top 100 games, mostly in the international market. But again, this idea of reusing the same type of technology, not having to overbuild things, and just figuring out what's working and then iterate on that. Last game I want to talk about here is an interesting case in branded games. I don't know if you guys have any kids or nieces or nephews, but this Elf on the Shelf thing, it's like this big thing during Christmas time where you have this little elf. So it's a small mom and pop company. I think they're based in Georgia or something like that. And the boss goes to the marketing director and says, hey, here's a budget to go out and get some contractor to build a game for Elf on the Shelf for Christmas. And so he said, you know what, screw that. I'm going to take that same budget, just kind of outsource some art and music, and create 20 games. And so literally a Lone Ranger with some contractors working with him. Didn't have a whole lot of game design experience, but picked it up fairly quickly. And he had 1.5 million downloads in 20 days, obviously leveraging the brand recognition of this. And then was named by TechCrunch as one of the top 3 new publishers in 2012. This kid in the marketing department. He had multiple top 20 hits in the iOS App Store, and really punctuated on Christmas Day. He had the #1 overall game in the Amazon store. So just really phenomenal stuff. These people, very scrappy, lightweight, low cost, getting out there, iterating, doing a lot of game development, and figuring out what works. So what are the key takeaways? My time's about wrapped up here, but again, I started off with saying calibrate expectations. If you remember what that average game does, 15, 20K, that's considered a failure for somebody that spends a whole year developing that multi-million-dollar game that they thought it was going to be. But if you know it's going to be 15 or 20 grand and you're able to do 10 or 20 of these, that's not a bad living there, and you can grow from there and staff up accordingly. But just knowing that not every game is going to be this big 6-7-figure runaway hit. Again, related to that, focus on smaller, more manageable projects. Ship in months, not years. Again, I think the best test here is just figuring out, do people actually give a crap about your game, as opposed to spending 2 years inside your head and thinking that you're creating the best game of all time. A little self-serving promotion here. Use cross-platform development tools and publish to all the major platforms. iOS, obviously the riches are there, but it's obviously a lot more competitive. You might find other niches on the Amazon Store or Google Play or Kindle Fire, Nook, what have you. Again, listen and measure. That's no matter how great your idea is, it really meets the metal when you get out there in people's hands and see if people actually care about this. And then as you're listening, you're looking at those reviews, you're listening to your customers, you're talking to them, you're looking at the data, then you kind of form hypotheses around that, how to develop better games. So go back, iterate on that feedback, and then reuse that core technology again. If you look at the Elf on the Shelf example, if you look on the Escape 3D example, these, largely the same game with a different skin on it with maybe a little twist. But you're able to get a lot of mileage out of that one piece of technology and get out there very quickly. And again, and kind of been talking about this throughout, but lots of smaller wins can add up to a much bigger win that you'd hope for, but with a lot less risk. If that game that you build in a month fails, then okay, you learn some things, you take your lumps, you back out there, and you make a better game the next time. But if that game that you spent 2 years on fails, then it's a little bit rougher, a little bit more depressing, and can kind of make you go home with your tail between your legs and a little bit burned on the whole NDC. So that's the Gamesalad story. Happy to open it up to audience if you guys have any questions.
I got a question. So do you guys open any native things like in-app purchasing, Game Center?
Yeah, so a couple things. One, yes, so we have, on the iOS side, we've got all, the Apple in-app purchase, we've got Game Center, we've got iAds, all that native stuff. And we're continuing to roll that out for more various platforms. But one interesting development, which I won't promise any dates here, is that we are creating a native plugin system to allow developers to kind of, if they need to create some kind of plugin for some of these native things that we don't currently support, then we provide that functionality as well. But to answer your question, yes, we do support in-app purchase and Game Center on Apple platforms.
Thank you very much, Steve.
Thanks, guys.